Welcome back, knitters. I'm Jana with Purl Together, and in this video we're going to talk about swatching for our upcoming knit along of the Campside Cardi sweater. Now if you don't have your pattern yet, click the link down below in the video description and get the code so you can get 25% off that purchase of the pattern between now and May 20th, which is just next week. So grab that and get swatching. Now, the reason that this is super important is lots of people are tempted to just do this little tiny square and then measure it with their little tiny knit check and the little window right here and call it good. I want to invest more time than that and make sure that what I'm doing is going to actually be correct. So I'm planning to invest a lot of hours and an investment of yarn. I want to make sure that it's right. And I think that a swatch deserves more than an hour in order to make that happen. If you're one of those few people that can get by with that, and you've knitted a bunch of sweaters and you know that your gauge is spot on after doing a tiny little square, then good for you. Go forth. May the knitting gods bless you. I am not that person. So it takes me, it's part of my preparation, and I like to knit, so I don't mind knitting swatches, and I plan for that, and I buy some extra yarn so that I can plan for that. Also, knitting a larger swatch allows me to have that record in my knitting journal so that I always know what yarn and needle combination produced what kind of results. So I've knitted a good size swatch here, okay? This is a good size swatch, okay? It's dark, so the lighting, I apologize for the weird lighting, but you can also tell that when I got gauge, it resulted in kind of an airy, more loose fabric. Now the pattern is designed to be drapey, so that's totally cool. But I didn't know that until, I didn't know that this would be how the fabric would feel until I had done enough of a swatch to see that result. I'm going to show you how I got gauge and how I measured it, how I knew. The other thing that this does was it shows me how the eyelets are going to look, right? I knitted through the chart a couple of times, actually the first chart and the second chart, so I could see how things are going to line up. And it's lovely. It's very enjoyable. Now, I'm not sure how I feel about the airiness or the density of the fabric. I may size down a needle and check and do the same thing. Now, if I size down a needle, that means I'm going to get more stitches per inch. So I'm going to have to knit more stitches to fit the size. So I'll have to adjust by doing the math for that. If you don't want to do that, get gauge to start with, so then you can just find the numbers on the pattern and go forth. I also want to take a moment to recognize our 3 newest patrons, Sheryl Silkie, Cindy Gabel, and Sharon Imler. Thanks so much for your pledges. Your patronage is what keeps these videos coming each and every week. If you want to learn how to become a patron, check out my page over at patreon.com/Purl Together. So what follows is how I went about doing a special cast on for my gauge swatch and a special bind off, and why you really don't need to be doing garter stitch edges. I've uploaded a video earlier this week about swatching specifically, but if you haven't had a chance to watch that yet, the people think they need to knit garter stitch edges so it lays flat. If you have knitted a large enough swatch that you can wash it and block it, then it will lay flat, and then you have plenty of room to measure so that you're getting that whole stitch on a whole inch. So we'll talk more about that in a minute. So what follows is me showing you the special cast on that I use when I do a gauge swatch, my process for all of that, including the measuring. So ideally what you really want is for your swatch to look like it's just a cookie cutter or a biscuit cutter that somebody went and took a window right out of your sweater. You want it to be an actual representation of what your finished garment will be. That's the whole point, right? Is to see how it's all going to be and have that sampling, have that little hors d'oeuvre before you invest in the full meal. All right, I have my lovely Urth Monokrom DK here. I usually make sure that I have an extra skein for swatching, and obviously, just in case I need it. So I have the tail coming off to the left, and I'm going to put my needle underneath there. And I want to have the tail on the top of the working yarn, okay? So the tail is going to go out to the back, and then I have the working yarn here underneath. So I'm going to pinch like I normally would. If you're starting, if a lot of people start a long tail cast on by going in like this and making a triangle. I don't normally do it this way, but a lot of people do. So if you're one of those, this should be familiar to you. Again, the tail is over the index finger of my left hand. So the first thing I'm going to do is bring the needle toward me, toward my thumb, and go underneath, through the middle, and then all the way around both strands. And then I continue that motion forward and do a yarn over. So I have a video just for this cast on, and I'll put the link to that down in the video description. So the other thing I want to do here is make sure I'm leaving enough slack and I'm having enough space here so that my cast on is not going to be too tight. So again, we're going to bring the needle toward your thumb, through the center, and all the way around. Carry on that motion forward and do a yarn over. And you can see I'm just working those stitches. I'm controlling the spacing of this with my right index finger. Okay, we'll do this a couple more times. Toward the thumb, through the middle, all the way around, and then continue around to do the yarn over. Now you're only going to do the yarn over if you're not finished with your cast on. If you're done, you won't do the yarn over. So every time we do this full motion, it casts on 2 stitches. So toward the thumb, through the middle, all the way around, yarn over. Okay, now how do I know how many stitches to cast on? Well, the pattern that I'm going to use calls for 18 stitches for 4 inches. I'm going to do a bigger swatch than that. I've already explained why in the introduction to this video. So I'm going to want 36-ish, maybe even 40, just to make sure that I have lots of places to measure and I get a good accurate measurement. Again, that whole stitch at the whole inch. So toward the thumb, through the middle, all the way around, yarn over. Okay, we're just going to continue doing that until we have enough stitches. After I completed the cast on, I knitted the first row, purled my way back. So I have 2 rows on here, counting the cast on. And I know this is very dark, but one thing I want to show you, let me zoom in, is that hopefully you can tell, hopefully you can see that this cast on kind of looks like a provisional cast on. What I mean by that is there's a horizontal strand running through the bottom of that. But it's 2 loops, right? It's 2 loops that go around this horizontal strand. So I'm not distorting the size of the stitch in any way, as you might with a traditional long tail rigid cast on or a knitted cast on. So the loops are literally just sitting on that horizontal strand, which is a great thing because then it's accurate and it's not distorting the edges. So hopefully you can see the value of that and foregoing the tendency or the habit of doing the long tail cast on with a couple garter stitch edges. So I'm going to carry on and keep knitting like this. So I'm going to do a few inches of that and then I'll show you the next step. Okay, I've completed my swatch here. I've knitted several inches. That's probably 4 or 5 inches anyway of just straight up stockinette. And I'm going to lay this out and block it properly here and I'll show you what all that looks like. But then I also did a couple of the charts here because after I block it, I want to see how the eyelets are going to look. So this whole thing is, probably, I don't know, 8 to 10 inches tall. But that's why I buy extra yarn for swatching, because I will not rip this out unless I need to, unless I'm actually running short enough and playing yarn chicken to the extent that I actually have to use my swatch. Otherwise, I'm going to keep this in my knitting journal and my binder because this gives me a lot of information. And we'll go over that in just a moment. The reason now that I'm not going to use the traditional, pull the yarn over standard rigid bind off, the reason I'm not going to do that is because, again, I don't want to distort these stitches here at the end. So what I'm going to do here is I've just trimmed a good sized tail and I'm just taking my yarn back through to mimic what we did in the beginning where we have the loops going around a horizontal strand. And then nothing's distorted. Everything is as if I've just taken a cookie cutter section out of my sweater. So I shouldn't have any surprises. I'm not going to have a swatch that lies to me, as Patty Lyons says. And credit where credit is due, I learned this method from her teachings. I have not had the fortune to see her in person, but I've watched several of her videos and read her blog posts on her website and so forth. So yeah, I learned this from her, and it's really a good practice if you want an accurate representation of what you can expect when you spend hours and hours and weeks knitting your actual garment. Okay, so I'm just going to pull that on through, and I just leave a good enough tail. It's not going to go anywhere. It's not going to come undone or go anywhere. I mean, I guess you could tie a bow or put something on there if you chose to. But now I'm going to give it a little soak, and I'm going to block it, and we'll see what we have to work with. All right, here's my gauge swatch, and I knitted quite a bit because I wanted to see how the eyelet chart was going to work and how everything was going to drape and bead together. So what I'm going to do, though, is measure. I'm going to turn this around so it's easier for you to see, and I'm going to measure just the stockinette portion. I asked Alicia specifically if the gauge was the eyelet section, and she said, no, it's the stockinette portion at the top of the sweater. So we're just going to zoom in here, and I'm going to show you how I'm going to measure that. I'm going to verify it in a couple different places. So I like to use a ruler rather than one of those knit check things. Well, you could use the ruler. You could use the ruler on the side of the knit check thing, I guess. But I don't like the window thing because you're only measuring 2 inches and we need a bigger span of stitches to be accurate. So the goal here is to measure a whole stitch on a whole inch. So maybe that'll happen right away over the course of 2 inches, but maybe I need to get all the way out to 4 or 5 inches to get to that whole stitch. So I'm not trying to measure a 1/4 stitch or a 1/2 of a stitch. So I hope that makes sense. Let me zoom in so you can see what I'm talking about. So I don't really like to start on the very edge of the ruler just because, I don't know, they always get chunked up on the edge. So I start here at the number 1 and I start right at the, let me get my camera to focus so you can tell what's going on here. We're going to start right at the edge of this stitch right there. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18. All right, I'm going to make sure that that's correct. I'm going to double count. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18 stitches out, and you can't see it over here on the 5. But I started at the 1, so that's 18 stitches within 4 inches, and that's what I want. So that's, now if it hadn't have been what I wanted, but I had a good idea that it was, because I kind of measured as I went along here. I knitted a few inches and then I measured. And then the reason I carried on above here is after I knew that I was going to get gauged down here, I still wanted to see what the drape was going to be like. I wanted to have enough to feel it. And now I have a really good representation of what that sweater is going to look like. I really want to encourage you to take the time, honor the fact that this sweater represents hours and hours of your knitting time. And it's meditative and we like to knit. So we like to knit swatches too, because it's all sort of the same process. So think of your swatch as the hors d'oeuvre to a fantastic feast, but the hors d'oeuvre deserves your attention also, right? And the enjoyment of having that. Savor that and the information that it tells you. So just make sure that you have enough yarn to do your swatches and set that aside and make some notes about it in Knit Companion or your knitting journal or a notebook or whatever it is you do, maybe on your Ravelry page. But sit with that and make sure it's what you want. Sometimes you'll have yarn that doesn't play well with the needles you've chosen. Sometimes you might want to decide that, well, it's particularly of a lace pattern, maybe these metal needles are a little bit too slippery and I want to go to a bamboo needle or a laminate needle or whatever that's going to feel better and be easier to work with. But you won't know that until you spent enough time with the swatch to tell. And then that will make your sweater knitting experience all the more enjoyable. Show me your swatches. I'd love to see them. If you find these videos helpful, click the thumbs up, click subscribe, and I hope to see you next time.